This week, we interview Matt Cauthorn, Vice President of Cybersecurity Engineering at ExtraHop, to discuss the three horsemen of SOC Intel. In the news segment, SolarWinds to acquire Samanage for $350 million, Tufin goes public, and Tenable releases predictive prioritization. And this week, our third segment airs our interview with Patrick Tierney from Endgame at InfoSec World 2019. So stay tuned for all of that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The Viavi Solutions Observer Platform provides SecOps teams a powerful combination of comprehensive data for threat hunting and incident response that includes wire data analytics and enriched flow records. Using pure, unaltered packet and net flow, Observer presents views across the entire IT infrastructure with threat alert features including scope, impact, and advanced traffic profiling. Teams can use automated workflows to dive into high-fidelity network evidence and more quickly resolve issues, minimizing impact on customers, users, and business operations. Learn more about the Viavi Network Security Solution and download free resources at securityweekly.com/Viavi. That's VIAVI. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observeit.com/securityweekly.
Welcome to episode number 133 of Enterprise Security Weekly for April 17th, 2019. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by John Strand.
Yeah, it's weird to be back. And I think like the last time I was on the show a few weeks ago, it was just you and me too.
The last time you and I did this, I lost power and you had to finish the show.
That's right. I'm actually starting to worry a little bit. I think I'm going to ask for proof of life of Paul to make sure that he's still alive and everything's okay.
Well, he did the show last week with Jeff, so he is alive.
Sure,
don't worry.
Sure. But we
have him in the back room.
I haven't seen him. I want you to send me his pinky or something. Then I know he's alive.
I need that pinky on the keyboard. I can't give it up yet.
Right now. Oh, yeah, no. I've already got a couple lockets of Paul's hair from back when he had it.
Yeah, I have the same problem.
Don't we all?
Yeah. With Kaseya's state-of-the-art technology, you can automate many of the repetitive manual tasks that take up much of your day while gaining visibility and control of remote and distributed environments. We put these powerful capabilities at your fingertips from a single pane of glass in one integrated IT management solution. To learn more about Kaseya, go to securityweekly.com/Kaseya. Register for our upcoming webcast with ServiceNow by going to securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find them at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Also, you can submit your suggestions for guests in our recently released guest suggestion form. Go to securityweekly.com/guests and enter your suggestions. Paul and I do review those and try to accommodate bringing those guests onto the various shows. All right, this segment is sponsored by ExtraHop. And with us from ExtraHop is Matt Cauthorn, who leads a team of technical security engineers who work directly with customers and prospects. A passionate technologist and evangelist, Matt is often on-site with customers, working to solve the complex and mission-critical security and business problems that Fortune 1000 and Global 2000 companies face. Prior to ExtraHop, Matt was a sales engineer manager at F5, and before that, he started his career in the trenches as a practitioner where he oversaw application hosting, infrastructure, and security for 5 international data centers. Matt, welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
Now, you were with us on the webcasts we did with ExtraHop It's been probably a couple months ago now. So you're a little familiar with coming onto the show. So welcome. We're going to talk about the 3 horsemen of SOC Intel. Now, Paul would say, wait, aren't there 4 components? Or typically I'm used to the 4 horsemen. But since we're talking about Intel, I guess the threat intelligence stack doesn't count in this discussion?
No, it does. Definitely does. It's it's funny, you stole my thunder almost. I was going to tuck in threat intel as the potential fourth. Not everybody uses it, and not everyone subscribes to the providers. And so we're emphasizing the 3, which most everyone will have some flavor of. In the sea of point solutions that are out there, they'll usually have logs, endpoint, and some approximation of wire data analysis. And so threat intelligence is definitely fair game. Happy to talk about that too.
Yeah, I mean, when Paul always lays this out, he talks about the 4 quadrants, and threat intelligence is that 4th component, along with endpoint log and wires, the packet side. So, all right, so let's talk through 3/4 horsemen here. Where I see the challenge, and correct me if I'm wrong, is, look, I've got endpoint data, I've got log data, I have wire data, I might have threat intel data. That's not the challenge. I think the challenge is, how do those 3 or 4 components come together and actually operationalize the SOC and provide intelligence to do something useful with the data?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add on to the challenge, and we can certainly talk about yours as well. One of the challenges that I see in the field is a lot of organizations, depending on where they fall in the maturity spectrum, haven't really thought through what each data source's constraints are, what their limitations are, what their strengths are. And understanding that is key to your point, Matt, where then I can start to federate these things and leverage each one of the horsemen, as it were, for what they're best at. So, if you consider endpoint visibility into the local file system, memory space, the process table, that's something that the wire wouldn't get. Now, we would see the behaviors of a given process as it traverses the network, the connective tissue of the environment. If you combine those 2 views, now you're really cooking with gas. You've got some very, very powerful context and insight that's kind of impossible to get otherwise.
Yeah, and then correlating that information with known potential attacks or threats or command and control, right, adds yet another layer of context on top, that now when you combine those pieces together, now you have some actionability behind it, which I think is the biggest challenge in the SOC is, what is real, what's not real, what should I act on, and what can I ignore?
And this ultimately boils down to something that we've said quite a bit on the show. Whenever a SOC starts to try to see absolutely everything, like we want full visibility in the endpoint, we want full visibility on the network, and they approach it from that perspective. And a lot of vendors, like the amount of alerts that you get can be easily overwhelming. You effectively see nothing. So, kind of putting a fine point on Matt's question is, how do you actually go from a white noise where everything is coming into the SOC to where you actually have some level of actionable intelligence that people can look at?
Well, so in order to answer that question, it's useful to rewind and think about the state of the industry today and the expectations that I think the 3 of us on the call right now are even leveling against the vendor space, is that the vendors that you pick, regardless of which lens you're looking through, from a SIM log file analysis perspective, say, or endpoint or wire, you have to be API first. You have to be API friendly, and you have to be willing to play in another vendor's sandbox, as it were. And I think that a lot of the space historically has siloed their data off in this sort of artificial wall. And it's not the vendor's data, it's the customer's data. So why would you do that? It's their, if you think about the enterprise as the ultimate source of your own threat intelligence, as it were, then it's your data, and it should be able to sort of be shared freely across the tool ecosystem in your environment. And so that's sort of requirement number 1. If you can skin that cat and you add in, say, you should be able to stream transaction and wire telemetry into your SIM, for example, because the SIM is very often the single sort of starting point for any investigation. And you should be able to integrate endpoint and wire data into your SIM and then jump off to those other solutions for the far, far deeper sort of view into their specific domains, as it were. And so this is really, I think that a lot of it has to be enabled by APIs first before anything else can happen. If you don't have an API-friendly solution, then you're kind of fighting with one hand tied behind your back.
So I got a question. Whenever we're talking about APIs, there are many different ways to look at that. Like you can actually have full JSON, you can connect into it and pull data directly out of the different services. But what are your feelings? You mentioned loading the data into a SIM. If your product has the ability to throw syslog and it has the ability to actually correlate that and tie that in a SIM solution, what would be some reasons why someone would still need to have access to an underlying API as well?
There's a lot of different. So in our case, I'll speak from the wire data perspective here, and then we can jump over to other solutions. Wire data is a really unique animal because as we're doing our analysis, we do our analysis in real time, and for many, many organizations, it's useful to stream that telemetry into another system, like a Kafka topic, for example, a syslog endpoint, like a SIM, for example, or whatever. Then there's the data at rest. And see, these are two very different sort of API targets or API endpoints in our world, because we do a lot of analysis on the data, and then it sits on our data store at rest. And so you should be able to scrape that data from the data at rest to get some of the extra intelligence and anomaly detection and things like that. But a lot of people are also interested in streaming the raw real-time telemetry in, which is a whole sort of separate space.
And it's kind of whenever you start integrating them then, right? You can have everything going to your SIM, but if the SIM generates an alert, now what? How do you actually quickly and easily spin up and get that data and correlate it across multiple platforms?
Oh yeah, so the alert should be that. Thank you. That's good. That's useful. So the alert should be enriched with sort of link backs to the solution of origin. So if it's coming from an endpoint solution, and I won't name names, everyone knows who they are. There's a bunch of them. It should be able to provide you the context from an alert perspective. The SIM ingest it, they surface the alert, and then you can click into your destination solution for your investigation, or many actually, given the situation. And vice versa. It's interesting because especially when you get into like SOAR platforms and orchestration, they can decorate our information with information from other systems like an endpoint. And we can now be privy to process table. We see the for tuple, we see the transactions traversing it. If it's encrypted, we'll decrypt it. They can then map it to the process that sourced that C2 communication, for example. It's very compelling.
Yeah, and desperately trying to get away from the copy and paste issues that so many SOCs deal with today. You have one solution that says we see X, and you got to copy it. You got to go over to another solution and then paste it in and see it. And having tighter integration, I agree, is a really, really good approach.
That's the swivel chair workflow that costs so much time, frankly. If you sort of unpack the topic, what we're really talking about is fewer tools, more capable tools in the arsenal that do more per unit time, and they work well with one another. And so the hope there is that you end up with this sort of 1 + 1 = 3 effect, ideally, where you're having it's not so much of a shotgun blast of point solutions in the environment. You're able to very seamlessly traverse from one domain, from a data source perspective, one data source into the next, from your SIM into your endpoint, then over back into the wire and vice versa. That's the goal.
Very cool.
I think one of the challenges here, back to your original point, is everybody wants to be the single pane of glass. Right. So part of the reason these APIs have been locked down for a while and this data hasn't been shared is everybody wants the analyst in their tool, right? Which the endpoint players want you in their endpoint solution. The SIMs want you in the SIM. Sometimes the packet guys want you in their solution. And to your point, that limits the ability to correlate all that data, make it actionable and intelligent to drive down false positives, but actually do something with the data. What I'm interested to understand is we think about these three pillars. Threat intelligence kind of goes into the SIM and kind of correlates with the log stuff. Who's in the best position to potentially bring all this data together in an effective way to really benefit the SOC, because everybody's fighting over that pane of glass view?
Yeah, so I have to comment on the pane of glass. It's a
go for it. Go for it.
I'm taking my vendor hat off, and I'm going to share my personal opinions on this. Is that the single pane of glass is a fantasy that the vendor space has leveled against the industry for many, many years, and I'm increasingly skeptical will ever come to pass. What it creates is a monolith that then an organization is literally and financially married to. It becomes more and more rigid over time, and it sort of underserves every one of the stakeholders. Philosophically, now I'm going to put the vendor hat back on. Philosophically, we believe in, optimizing a solution for what it does best, and then integrating it with other things that do their thing best. So from a single pane of glass perspective, I think that this is an unattainable fantasy. From a workflow invocation perspective, like if I'm a SOC analyst, where do I start my day? And what's my main point of entry into the world of the SOC? That is very logically the SIM in most shops, and that's fine. Now, when it comes to, there are certain analysts, depending on what your task is, there are certain analysts that will go to wire first. There's others who are going to sort of stay pegged to the SIM, which makes a lot of sense. And in either case, it should be fairly seamless to transition from one of those domains over into the next.
Yeah. So I think that's the point that I wanted to make sure everybody got, right? Is if the SIM is kind of the central hub, maybe it's not the single pane of glass, but it's the central hub of where you're doing your day-to-day activities in the SOC, the ability to pivot to other data sources, whether it's the log, whether it's the endpoint data or the packet data from the wire, that's where the important integration comes into play, because then that makes it really efficient for the SOC analysts to get the additional contextual information they need to start the incident and investigation work to ultimately respond to.
Totally. Yeah, I'm a big believer in Pareto's law. There's a 20% tool deployment that gives you 80% plus of your day-to-day utility and value. Start there and emphasize that. Make sure those things work well together, and all of a sudden you're at 95% of your value versus, a shotgun blast of, like I said before, a shotgun blast of point solutions, which forces you to swivel chair over and opens up all of these coordination barriers, slows things down ultimately.
Yeah. So if I'm building a highly optimized security operations program, I need a good endpoint solution. I need a good network solution. I need a good logging solution, and maybe some threat intel sources all integrated together to be effective, right? I mean, that's the basic components.
That's right. If you do those things and do them deliberately and strategically, you will address the vast majority of your security controls, your IR workflows, even forensics in many cases or most. And so this is absolutely the sort of the strategic pillars of the SOC, in our opinion, from an ops intel perspective and situational awareness perspective. There's no doubt about it.
I've got a question on the threat intel thing. Why should threat intelligence, data aggregation, and implementation be the job of the SOC or the endpoint customer? And I bring this up because companies like you, I sat down with the demo and I went through it, and you guys very clearly are pulling in threat intelligence data and you're correlating different attack patterns like the DNS backdoors that you guys have in some of your demos. You are doing that. The endpoint people, if you have Cylance, Carbon Black, they're doing it. That is literally their job, right? To identify the signatures and the attack patterns and behaviors of advanced adversaries. If you're looking at email filtering and web filtering for proxying, every single one of your vendors should be doing that. So why should there be any responsibility whatsoever for the end customer to subscribe to additional feeds when their vendors should be doing that for them as part of what their product should do?
Well, that's a topic of potential debate. I think that in many cases, it's industry specific, it's vertical specific, and there are certain intel feeds that they perceive to be more valuable than the next. And so from our perspective, we don't discriminate. If it's the open source stuff that's out there, you want to do that, go for it. As long as it's in the sticks format, we'll support it. What we find is that there's quite a bit of variance and preference on the customer end as to which feeds they like the most, and we try to support that. I can't speak for the other folks in the space, but I think that it's probably similar.
Interesting, because I mean, if the threat integrations, the threat correlations are being done by all the other solutions, to John's point, why have a bunch of extra feeds that you're paying for? Because you're already getting value out of threat intelligence from the correlated feeds you're bringing together into your integrated SOC anyways. So it's just
we believe in bring your own feed, and we believe that the vendors in the space should support your feed. If that helps, I think.
Got it. Yeah, but then so let's take that one step further, right? It's my feed, my customer feeds. Now I'm responsible for doing the correlation with you and with my SIM and potentially with my endpoint. It may not be worth the headache potentially, though, if your feeds are just as accurate and you're already giving me that correlated event. That just takes a workload off of me that I don't have to manage.
So there's a use case though for example, depending on which TI hit you're talking about, you might have a file hash of interest that would be very squarely in the domain of an endpoint solution. In our case, we care about DNS names, IP addresses, and URIs at layer 7. So that is sort of web world, that's network world, and that particular space of the same exact feed, potentially, that particular space would be relevant to us. And again, to me, it's just an extension of the sort of partitioning of what each tool in the arsenal is good at doing. And for what it's worth, the integration should be a simple push. So it can be a batch script where you pull down your sticks file, or you get it from your taxi feed and then push it into the endpoints in question, or they can subscribe to the feed themselves.
Yeah, got it. So I'm going to ask this weird question because I'm curious. Is SOAR, orchestration and automation, where does it sit? I mean, if you think about the 4 pillars, right? We talk about the data aggregation and bringing all that together, but I think this concept of automation and orchestration, how does it fit into this concept of the 4 horsemen? Does it play the 5th horseman in the potential role? Or is it just a different component altogether?
No, I mean, as far as the strategic pillars go for the SOC, and I would absolutely argue that SOAR is here to stay, and it's going to become increasingly important into the future, mostly because of the 0% unemployment rate in the SOC. We can't hire enough security analysts to staff the problem at hand, and SOAR and automation and orchestration like that is very, very compelling in that regard. And so I really think that it's here to stay. It should be here to stay, because many of the tasks that, in fact, we're even talking about now, consider the TI integration that is now made a trivial sort of checkbox drag and drop operation. You set it once and forget it, and now all of your solutions are the beneficiaries of your TI feed. So I think that SOAR is absolutely here to stay, and it should be. It's a great movement. I'm excited by it.
I think though, whenever we're talking about SOAR, we have to make sure it's being implemented correctly. Where was I? I can't remember. Was talking to Charlie Frick and a bunch of other people that were there at the beginning when they were defining what SOAR was going to be. And the idea of SOAR originally was look at the mundane, repetitive tasks that your security team does. And is there a way to automate that so then the security team can focus on harder issues? And I think that idea and that promise of SOAR is absolutely something we should all try to aspire to and we should welcome. However, the way SOAR is being sold to many companies is kind of similar to the single pane of glass. It seems like a good idea, but whenever you start picking at what people expect from it, it starts to fall apart, because what most organizations are trying to buy when they buy a SOAR platform is they want end-to-end automation. They want the malware to be detected. They want it to be isolated. They want that system to be quarantined. They want it to be cleaned, and they want it to be remediated. And that sounds fantastic right up into the point that you actually brick a production system or a CEO's computer, and then all of a sudden SOAR doesn't quite sound so good for the technical people that implemented it. So any organizations that are looking at it, they really have to look at it, are you trying to purchase a product to replace people? Or are you trying to purchase a product that's going to enable people to focus in and drill in on hard things? And, I'm going to pick on ExtraHop here, right? With ExtraHop, it is not a magic tool that just basically says you've been hacked. It gives you the ability. Whenever I sat down with it at RSA, one of the things I loved is it gave me the ability to continue to pick at a problem, to tear that problem apart, get details. So I had good data so I could make a good decision. And I think that that is exactly what SOC should be enabled with, is platforms that make them better at their jobs, automate the mundane tasks, and not trying to completely replace the entire human. And if you look at, you talk about single pane of glass, it's an oversimplification of a security problem. Artificial intelligence, very, very helpful, but it's not what people think it's going to be. And SOAR is also part of that as well.
Totally agree with you. One of the most common questions we get asked by customers and prospects is, can you actively block this thing? Basically, they're asking us to go in line. We're passive out of band. We're an analytics solution. We're not IPS has been trying to do that effectively for 20 plus years now, and we all know how that's worked out. So your point completely stands. I think, one of my shops that's quite mature, they have this full-on chat ops thing going on where they're doing all of this sophisticated orchestration. They're federating all the data sources. They're making really intelligent decisions, but the analyst or whoever is on call has to make the final call as to whether or not that laptop from the executive should be quarantined or not. And they hit go. Then from there, the mundane tasks are automated. But I completely agree with you that it's just not fair to expect the solution landscape to solve all of these problems for humans, because I think that you incur too much risk when you do it. So again, you want to sort of optimize around that boundary of like stacking the deck in favor of high quality decisions, which then lead to high quality human-led outputs.
Well, and if you look at the state of the attacks, right? If you're looking at a lot of the attacks and where they're actually going, and this, I was talking with one of your engineers. If you look at how most organizations look at network data analytics, they believe that problem was solved with intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. And it got ignored for years and years and years and years and years. And as you know, and I know, it was actually falling apart with the rise of encryption, steganography, and communication protocols, bouncing off domain fronting and using C2 channels through things like Gmail. And like DNS is one of the ones that you guys talk about a lot. The attackers got better and better and better at evading those different network technologies. And it created this massive gap that no one was able to see. And it's really hard to kind of open people's eyes and say, look, no, we still need a human because there's a huge gap here. And it's been ignored and neglected for, I would say, 6-7 years. And we need to rectify that and address that as quickly as possible.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that it's, there are many vendors in the space that make very dubious claims about the efficacy of their detection capabilities and remediation capabilities and all. And look, anyone who's been in the industry for any time knows that there's a very large class of attack that can evade detection. So now you're left with an analytics problem at the end of the day. And so then what? Then what do you do? Well, you have to fall back to your data sources and the Horsemen, going back to the theme of the topic.
Yeah.
And I agree with you, by the way. We've seen a lot of activity in the SOAR space. I think SOAR is here to stay. I'm just trying to figure out if it becomes more of a first-class citizen, which I think it will, as we continue to see some very interesting consolidation in that market. So maybe it is the fourth or fifth horseman, depending on how we put all the pieces together.
Yeah, and I think that you'll see that it will be a first-class citizen as the barriers to adoption and implementation lower. And the industry, the SOAR industry, I'm a little bit nervous by the acquisitions in the space, frankly. I think that there's some good companies acquiring other very good companies, but I'm just hoping it doesn't artificially tamp down the potential of SOAR, because I really see a lot of potential there. And I think that the barriers are continuing to decrease, and therefore the uptake is going to increase.
Well, you mentioned the 80-20 rule. We give advice to vendors all the time. If you're a SOAR vendor, like, it's very, very simple. Focus on the 80% of the things that you can automate with 20% of the effort. Do not focus on that last 20% of the really, really hard things, because for right now, the humans need to be involved in those 20%. And if you can focus on automating that 80% of the mundane crap task that happens every single day in every single SOC, your product's going to be very successful.
I had one of our customers, I checked in on him, give him a call. To this point exactly, I said, well, how's it going? He goes, it's going great. So, well, what are you doing with the stuff? What are you doing with the solution? He goes, oh, I'm not doing anything. I said, what do you mean? Do I need to come out there? Do you need, he said, no, I'm back to work on my projects that have been queued up because I've been fighting all these sort of this interrupt driven firestorm and the circular firing squad that happened in the war room. Right. And so now he was doing project work because he had freed up so much time. And to me, that was like the best compliment we could have gotten. That was exactly what I needed to hear.
Guys like that need to get to those types of activities, right? You can't have it be that your really, really smart senior engineers have to get involved in absolutely every single problem that comes down the line. You need to make sure that you can work with a solution that a junior analyst can sit down and get a long ways down that path to making a determination, evil or not, and what to do about it, that you don't have those really precious, rare resources that have to get involved into absolutely everything.
That's right. And not to hammer the SOAR drum too hard, but there too, think of SOAR as a conduit to like instill that level of knowledge into an automated, repetitive thing that you can then spread throughout the organization. That's very, very intriguing and is definitely one of the potentials in SOAR.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. John, do you have any other questions? I think we covered a lot.
No, I honestly look at ExtraHop as kind of brothers in arms. What they're doing and looking at their platform and the stuff that they're working on is just very, very cool. So happy to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Great to be back. And anytime, let us know.
Perfect. If anyone wants to learn more about ExtraHop, please visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. We'll take a short break, then cover the enterprise security news for this week.